Beg me for food. The maid, the rain, and the billionaire who finally saw the truth. Get on your knees and beg for it. Vanessa Whitmore screamed, hurling the plate of bread onto the wet driveway. Rosa Delgado, soaked to the bone, dropped down anyway, not for the food, but because her daughter hadn't eaten since yesterday. She didn't know that behind the tinted window of the mansion, a phone was already recording. She didn't know that in exactly 4 days, the man standing frozen in the rain would learn a secret that would end everything Vanessa had built. Some storms washed things clean. This one was about to expose everything hidden underneath. Welcome back, friends, to the stories that make you feel something real. Tonight's story is about pride, cruelty, and the quiet strength of a woman who had nothing left to lose but her dignity. It's got heartbreak, hope, and a twist you will not see coming. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from tonight? Nobody in that mansion knew the maid was the only one telling the truth. Rosa Delgado had worked for the Whitmore family for 3 years, ever since her husband died in a construction accident that the company he worked for never fully paid out for. She had a 9-year-old daughter named Mia, a small apartment in Newark, and a work ethic that never once wavered, even on the days her body ached so badly she could barely climb the mansion's back stairs. The Whitmore estate sat on 12 acres outside Greenwich, Connecticut, all white columns and manicured hedges, the kind of house that looked like it belonged on a postcard rather than in real life. Daniel Whitmore, 34 years old, had inherited half his father's hospitality empire and built the other half himself, turning a chain of boutique hotels into a nationwide name. He was not a cruel man. If anything, people who worked for him described him as distant but fair, a man who noticed details. A chipped tile, a missed shift, a birthday forgotten by everyone else in the building. What Daniel hadn't noticed, not for a long time, was his fiancée. Vanessa Whitmore, soon to carry his name, had not always been the woman barking orders through the halls of his home. 10 years ago, when Daniel met her at a charity gala in Boston, she'd been a nursing student working nights to pay her own tuition. She used to tip generously even when she barely had enough herself. She used to stop and talk to the janitor at her dorm building like he was an old friend. Daniel had fallen for that woman. Kind, unpretentious, warm in a way that felt rare in his circles. But engagement to a billionaire came with a new world attached, and that world had teeth. Vanessa's old friends drifted away, replaced by women who measured friendship in designer handbags and dinner reservations. Her future mother-in-law, elegant and razor-tongued, made it clear that a Whitmore bride needed to act the part. Slowly, year by year, party by party, comment by comment, something in Vanessa hardened. She began correcting her posture in mirrors more than she corrected her heart. She began believing that respect was something you demanded, not earned. By the time she stood in the foyer of that mansion barking at staff, she'd convinced herself she was simply maintaining standards. That Tuesday morning began like most others. Rosa arrived at 6:15, an hour before her shift technically started, because Vanessa liked breakfast trays prepared before she woke. Rosa moved quietly through the kitchen, careful, precise, the way she moved through everything in that house, like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping animal. "You're late," Vanessa said from the doorway, arms crossed, already in her silk robe. Rosa blinked. "Ma'am, it's 6:15. My shift starts at 7. I didn't ask for your shift schedule. I asked why my coffee isn't ready." Vanessa's voice had an edge that made the younger housekeeper, Priya, freeze mid-step across the room. Rosa said nothing. She had learned, painfully, that arguing only made things worse. She poured the coffee with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the accumulated weight of 100 mornings just like this one. What none of them knew was that 3 floors up in his home office, Daniel Whitmore had a video call scheduled with a business partner in Los Angeles. A call he would end early that day, because something about the tone drifting up through the vents made him uneasy. He didn't yet understand why. He only knew that lately, walking through his own house felt like walking through someone else's storm. Later that afternoon, Rosa's daughter Mia called the house phone, something she was never supposed to do, but did anyway, whispering that she felt dizzy and hadn't eaten lunch because the school cafeteria card had run out of balance again. Rosa's stomach dropped. She'd meant to reload it that morning. She'd forgotten, exhausted, worried about a dozen other things. She asked Priya to cover for 15 minutes so she could run to the corner store 2 blocks away. Should have taken 12 minutes there and back. Took 14. And in those 14 minutes, everything in Rosa Delgado's life quietly began to change, though she wouldn't understand how much until the rain came pouring down 3 days later, and Vanessa Whitmore's fury finally boiled over in front of the one person whose opinion she could no longer control. 14 minutes was all it took to light the fuse. When Rosa returned, soaked from a light drizzle that had started while she was out, Vanessa was waiting in the kitchen with her arms crossed and her jaw set in a way the staff had learned to fear. "Where were you?" Each word its own sentence. "My daughter," she needed. Rosa started. "I don't pay you to have a daughter. I pay you to be here." Vanessa's voice cracked through the kitchen like a whip. Priya lowered her eyes and busied herself with dishes that didn't need washing. Rosa apologized. She always apologized, even when she hadn't done anything that deserved one. It was easier than fighting a battle she couldn't win. But something had shifted in Vanessa that week, and it had nothing to do with coffee or cafeteria cards. 2 days earlier she'd overheard Daniel's mother, Eleanor, on the phone with a friend, laughing about how some women just weren't built for this life. You can dress them up, but you can't erase where they came from. Vanessa hadn't asked who Eleanor meant. She was terrified it was her. So Vanessa did what people sometimes do when they feel small. She made someone else feel smaller. It was easier to loom over Rosa than to face the fear gnawing at her own chest. That despite the ring, despite the mansion, despite years of trying, she would never truly belong in Daniel's world. That fear had curdled into something ugly, and Rosa had become its target. That evening, an important dinner was scheduled. Investors from Daniel's hotel group flying in from Chicago, along with Eleanor herself. Vanessa wanted everything perfect. She wanted, more than anything, to prove she belonged at that table. The dinner started well enough. Wine was poured, laughter exchanged, business talk drifting comfortably around expansion plans for a new resort chain in the Carolinas. Then Rosa, carrying a tray of appetizers, slipped slightly on a wet patch near the terrace doors. Rain had begun seeping under the frame during the storm building outside, and a small plate of bread rolls tumbled to the floor. The room went quiet. "Are you serious right now?" Vanessa stood so fast her chair scraped loudly against the marble. "In front of my guests." "I'm so sorry, I'll clean it up right away," Rosa said, already kneeling to gather the rolls. But Vanessa wasn't finished. Years of swallowed insecurity, of feeling like an outsider in silk dresses, of being laughed at behind manicured hands, came pouring out in one furious wave, and Rosa was standing in its path. "Get outside," Vanessa hissed, low enough that only Rosa and the nearest guests heard. "You want to embarrass me. Fine. Go stand in the rain and think about your job." Rosa's face went pale. "Ma'am, please, it's pouring. Now." Daniel, deep in conversation with an investor about quarterly projections, hadn't caught the exchange. By the time he turned, Rosa was already walking, stiff-backed and silent, toward the front doors, the storm visible through the tall windows, lightning flickering somewhere over the tree line. Eleanor, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. One of the investors quietly checked his watch, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. But nobody stopped it. Nobody said a word. Outside, the rain hit Rosa like something personal. She stood on the stone driveway, drenched within seconds, her uniform clinging to her, thinking not of her own humiliation but of Mia, waiting for her at home, probably hungry again because the $20 Rosa had left hadn't been enough for both dinner and the cafeteria card. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Vanessa, watching from the window with a glass of wine in hand, felt a flicker of something. Not quite guilt, but its shadow, before pushing it down and turning back to her guests with a bright, practiced smile. It was Priya who finally couldn't take it anymore. She slipped outside with an umbrella and a blanket, whispering that she'd bring Rosa in through the service entrance before anyone else noticed. But someone had already noticed. Daniel had stepped out onto the side terrace for air, phone in hand, only to see through the rain-streaked glass a small, huddled figure kneeling on the driveway, and his fiancée standing over her, pointing, shouting something he couldn't fully hear through the storm. He didn't move at first. He just watched, disbelief spreading cold through his chest, as the woman he was supposed to marry in 4 months screamed at a kneeling, soaked employee to beg for a plate of bread that had spilled by accident. And in his pocket his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, sent just seconds earlier. That would soon change everything. Mr. Whitmore, you need to see what your fiancé did to my sister last year. Have proof. Check your email. The email in his inbox had been sitting there for 11 months, waiting for the right moment to be opened. Daniel stood frozen on the terrace, rain misting against his suit jacket. His mind split between 2 storms, the one outside and the one now unfolding inside his chest. He opened his phone with shaking fingers and found the email exactly as the text promised. Sent almost a year ago, buried in a folder his assistant had created for unverified tips, never flagged, never read. The subject line read, "Please believe me. My sister worked for your fiancé." He clicked it open right there in the rain. The email was from a woman named Carla Reyes, whose younger sister, Anna, had worked as Vanessa's personal assistant before Rosa was ever hired. Nearly 2 years earlier, back when the engagement was fresh and Vanessa was still finding her footing in Daniel's world. According to Carla, Vanessa had fired Anna without cause, without severance, and without a reference after accusing her, falsely, of stealing a bracelet that Vanessa had, in fact, simply misplaced in her own gym bag. Anna, unable to find new work because of the accusation trailing her, had fallen behind on rent, lost her apartment, and moved back in with her parents in Ohio. Carla had tried reaching out to Daniel's office multiple times. The emails had gone unanswered, filtered by an overzealous assistant protecting the family from drama. Daniel read it twice, his jaw tightening with every line. Attached were text messages, dated and time-stamped, of Vanessa admitting privately to a friend that she knew the bracelet was in her own bag, and firing Anna anyway because, in her words, "I need people who don't ask questions." He looked up. Through the glass doors, Vanessa was gesturing animatedly, laughing at something one of the investors said, utterly unaware that the ground beneath her was shifting. Outside on the driveway, Rosa was still kneeling in the downpour, hands pressed together, not begging, Daniel would later realize, but praying. Praying that this job, this paycheck, this thin thread keeping her daughter fed, would still exist tomorrow. Something in Daniel cracked open. He walked back inside, past the dining room without a word, and went straight to the front doors. The investors fell silent as he passed. Eleanor half rose from her chair. He didn't stop for any of them. He stepped out into the storm, kneeled directly in front of Rosa, heedless of his $3,000 suit soaking through in seconds, and gently took her trembling hands. "Get up," he said quietly. "You're not begging for anything. Not ever again." Rosa looked at him, stunned, rain streaming down both their faces. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything wrong." His voice was steady, but something dangerous simmered underneath it. He helped her to her feet, wrapped his own suit jacket around her shoulders, and turned toward the house, where Vanessa now stood in the doorway, wine glass forgotten somewhere behind her, her face draining of color as she registered the look on his face. "Daniel, what are you doing? You're getting soaked, come in." "Ana Reyes," he said simply. The name landed like a slap. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed. "I what? You fired an innocent woman over a bracelet you lost yourself. You let her lose everything. And now you're doing the same thing to Rosa, over bread rolls, in front of my business partners." His voice carried across the driveway, loud enough now for everyone inside to hear, including his mother, who had gone very still near the window. "How many others, Vanessa? How many people have you done this to while I wasn't looking?" Vanessa's carefully composed face collapsed into something raw and frightened. "Daniel, please, not like this, not in front of everyone. You didn't seem to care about doing it in front of everyone 15 minutes ago." Thunder rolled overhead. Rosa, still wrapped in Daniel's jacket, looked between them, unsure whether to stay or slip quietly away. But Daniel gently kept a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, as though afraid that if he let go, this fragile moment of justice might slip away with the rain. "What would you do?" the moment seemed to whisper to everyone watching, staff and guests alike. "If you were the one kneeling in the storm, and the truth finally came to save you?" Vanessa had 30 seconds to explain a year of cruelty. She used every one of them to make it worse. "She stole from me," Vanessa said, too quickly, too defensively. "I told you, the bracelet. I read the messages, Vanessa." Daniel's voice was quiet now, which was somehow more frightening than shouting. "You knew it was in your gym bag. You fired her anyway. You let her lose her apartment. You let her sister beg my office for help while you smiled at charity galas talking about your commitment to community." Eleanor, standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, finally spoke, her voice smaller than anyone had heard it in years. "Daniel, perhaps this conversation belongs inside." "No," Daniel said. "It belongs exactly here in the rain, where she put Rosa 15 minutes ago." The investors from Chicago exchanged uncomfortable glances, one of them quietly gathering his coat, clearly recalculating whether this deal was worth the discomfort of witnessing a family implode in real time. Vanessa's composure finally shattered completely. Tears mixed with rain on her face, though it was hard to tell which was which. "You don't understand what it's like," she said, voice breaking. "Every day, your mother's friends looking at me like I don't belong. Every dinner, someone asking where I really grew up, like my father's plumbing business wasn't good enough. I thought if I could just seem like I belonged here, eventually I would. I didn't mean to become." She stopped, unable to finish the sentence, because even she seemed to recognize the word waiting there. Cruel. For a moment, something in Daniel's expression softened, just slightly. The memory of the woman who used to tip generously, who used to sit with him on cheap diner stools and dream about a fairer world, flickering briefly beneath the mask of the woman standing in front of him now. "I understand feeling like an outsider," he said finally. "I don't understand using that pain as an excuse to hurt people who have even less power than you do. Rosa didn't make you feel small. My mother's friends did. You chose to take it out on her instead of confronting them." Rosa, still standing quietly beside him, spoke for the first time since Daniel had helped her up. "Ma'am," she said softly, surprising everyone, "I forgive you. I don't say that because I have to. I say it because I know what it feels like to be scared of losing everything. I've felt that every day since my husband died. I just never let it turn me into someone who scares other people." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Vanessa's knees seemed to weaken. She gripped the doorframe to stay upright, sobbing now without any performance behind it, the raw sound of someone finally seeing themselves clearly after years of looking away. Daniel turned to Rosa. "Go inside, get warm, get dry. Priya, please help her. And take the rest of the night off, both of you, fully paid. Plus a bonus for everything you've endured this past year that I clearly should have noticed sooner." Then he turned back to Vanessa, and his voice, though quiet, carried a finality that silenced the entire driveway. "I need some time," he said. "Away from this house. Away from this engagement. I'm not calling off the wedding tonight in the rain in front of an audience. You've done enough theater for one evening. But I need you to understand something clearly. The woman I fell in love with wouldn't have let this happen. I don't know if she's still in there somewhere. Hope she is. But I can't marry the version of you standing in front of me right now. He walked back inside without waiting for a response, guiding Rosa gently by the shoulder, leaving Vanessa standing alone on the driveway in the rain, the same rain she had forced someone else to kneel in less than half an hour earlier. 6 months can change a person more than 60 years of comfort ever could. The weeks following that storm were the hardest of Vanessa Whitmore's life. Daniel didn't call off the engagement immediately, but he moved out of the shared penthouse in the city, taking time, real time, to think. The investors' deal in Chicago fell through, not because of the scene itself, but because Daniel personally called each partner afterward, choosing honesty over image, explaining that his family had some things to work through before doing business as usual. Some respected him more for it. That mattered more to him than the deal ever had. Vanessa, humiliated and frightened by the mirror finally held up to her, did something she hadn't expected of herself. She asked for help. Not from her wealthy circle, who suddenly seemed less interested in her without the Whitmore name attached, but from a therapist recommended by, of all people, Rosa, who mentioned, without judgment, that grief counseling had helped her survive the year after her husband's death. It wasn't easy. Vanessa spent months confronting the parts of herself she'd built like armor. The sharp words, the desperate need for control, the fear disguised as arrogance. She personally sought out Ana Reyes, drove to Ohio herself instead of sending a lawyer, and apologized face-to-face, offering not just financial restitution but genuine, tearful accountability. Ana, cautious at first, eventually accepted. Not because the apology erased the damage, but because it was real. She also returned to Rosa, not with grand gestures, but with quiet consistency. Covering Mia's school expenses without making it a spectacle, learning her staff's names and stories, showing up to the small moments instead of only the ones with an audience. It didn't undo a year of cruelty overnight. But Rosa began to see, slowly, unmistakably, glimpses of the kind young nursing student Daniel had once described falling in love with. Daniel watched this transformation carefully, cautiously, never rushing back into certainty. 6 months after that rainy night, he sat with Vanessa on the same terrace where he'd once watched her scream at a kneeling woman, and asked her one question: "Why do you think it's different now?" Vanessa didn't answer with promises or excuses. She simply said, "Because now, when I feel like I don't belong somewhere, I don't make someone else feel smaller to cover it up. I sit with it. It's harder. But it's real." They didn't rush back into the wedding. Instead, they rebuilt slowly, honestly, the way real love actually requires. Not with fairy tale speed, but with the patient, unglamorous work of two people choosing every day who they wanted to become. Rosa remained with the family for years afterward, not as a symbol of anyone's redemption story, but simply as Rosa, respected, valued, and finally truly seen. Mia grew up knowing her mother's quiet dignity had mattered, that kindness kept even in the pouring rain had eventually found its reward, not because the universe owed her one, but because some truths are too strong to stay hidden forever. And Vanessa, years later, would tell anyone who asked that the worst night of her life, kneeling in shame on that same driveway where she'd once forced someone else to kneel, had actually been the night she was finally saved from the person she'd almost become. Wealth and status can change how the world treats you, but they can never decide who you truly are underneath. Real strength isn't found in commanding people to kneel. It's found in the quiet dignity of getting back up again and again, no matter how hard the storm falls. If this story moved you tonight, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Rosa's place? Share this with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always outlasts cruelty. See you in the next story.